In all my years tracking Australian weather disasters, from Cyclone Tracy to the Black Summer fires, nothing compares to what's happening today. We're witnessing weather patterns that remind me of the worst natural disasters in our nation's history, all occurring simultaneously. If you lived through the Brisbane Floods, the Victorian bushfires, or Cyclone Tracy, you'll understand the gravity of today's situation. This isn't just another weather event. This is the kind of atmospheric chaos that gets remembered for generations. What's developing across Australia today has the potential to join the ranks of our most infamous weather catastrophes. Before I explain why this could surpass some of our worst natural disasters, tell me your location in the comments. Understanding where everyone is positioned helps me explain how this historic pattern affects your specific region. During times when nature unleashes forces that dwarf human achievement, I find comfort knowing God's providence guides our nation. Let me paint you a picture of the catastrophic scenario unfolding across our continent. Queensland is experiencing flooding reminiscent of the devastating 2011 Brisbane Floods, but spread across larger areas. The vision of land cruisers submerged beneath floodwaters echoes the car-swallowing floods of decades past. Mount Isa region faces the kind of relentless rainfall that creates legendary flood events. Brisbane and Gold Coast residents enjoying 31 degrees might remember similar calm before historical disasters. The thunderstorms building across northern Queensland rival the supercells that devastated communities historically. Townsville and Cairns face hail threats comparable to the cricket ball-sized stones that destroyed Darwin suburbs. The Coral Sea tropical low develops with intensity reminiscent of the monsters that spawned Cyclone Tracy. New South Wales confronts an inland trough system that echoes the atmospheric patterns behind historical disasters. Sydney's deceptive 28 degrees mirrors the calm conditions that preceded the worst hailstorms in city history. The explosive storm development approaching reminds meteorologists of the supercells that devastated suburbs. Newcastle and Central Coast face convective scenarios matching the patterns that created legendary storms. Canberra's position in this atmospheric crossfire resembles the setup for the most destructive hailstorms. Victoria experiences conditions that veteran meteorologists compare to Black Friday weather patterns. Melbourne's cool 24 degrees deceptively masks danger levels that preceded historical weather disasters. The violent air mass collision approaching matches atmospheric warfare from our worst weather days. Geelong and Ballarat face supercell potential comparable to the storms that levelled communities. But here's where today's situation becomes truly historic in its terrifying implications. Western Australia endures heat that rivals the conditions during our most deadly heatwave events. Perth's 36 degrees represents just the beginning of temperatures that could rival Black Saturday conditions. Kalgoorlie and the Goldfields face heat comparable to the conditions that killed hundreds in previous decades. This isn't just uncomfortable warmth. This is life-threatening heat matching our worst historical records. The heat dome persistence threatens to exceed the duration of our most deadly heatwave events. South Australia temporarily escapes in the eye of this historic storm, with Adelaide's pleasant 25 degrees. Mount Gambier's cool 20 degrees provides relief reminiscent of safe havens during historical disasters. Tasmania offers sanctuary with Hobart's delightful 19 degrees, like the refuges during mainland catastrophes. Northern Territory faces the kind of tropical development that spawned our most destructive cyclones. Darwin's 33 degrees conceals monsoon potential matching the patterns that created Cyclone Tracy. Alice Springs endures furnace conditions comparable to the heat that created legendary survival stories. What makes today historically significant is the simultaneous occurrence of multiple extreme events. Never in recorded Australian history have we faced catastrophic flooding, extreme heat, and severe storms simultaneously. This represents the perfect storm scenario that emergency planners have feared since Federation. The timing approaching Australia Day echoes disasters that reshaped national celebration priorities. Emergency services face coordination challenges exceeding anything experienced during previous disasters. Before I detail the historical comparisons, share your observations of these developing conditions. Community reporting during historical events always provides the most accurate ground truth. The rainfall intensity approaching matches the deluge rates that created our most devastating floods. 25 millimetres per hour represents the rainfall rate that overwhelmed Brisbane's drainage during 2011. Hailstone-size predictions match the destructive hail that devastated Sydney suburbs historically. Tennis ball-sized hail caused billions in damage during previous supercell events. Wind speed forecasts approach the velocities that toppled power lines during historical storms. 120 kilometres per hour winds created the debris fields that injured hundreds during past disasters. Lightning frequency increases to levels that spark the fires during our worst bushfire seasons. Heat-related casualty potential matches the mortality rates during our deadliest heatwave periods. Here's your historical survival guide based on lessons learned from previous disasters. Flood preparation. Lessons from 2011 Brisbane floods demand higher ground evacuation planning. Heat survival. Black Saturday experiences teach us about cooling centre importance. Storm shelter. Cyclone Tracy survivors emphasise interior room safety during violent winds. Communication. Previous disasters proved redundant contact methods save lives. Supply storage. Historical events demonstrate 3-day minimum supply necessity. Vehicle safety. Past floods taught never to drive through water of unknown depth. The monsoon development resembles the patterns that created our most destructive tropical cyclones. Category 5 atmospheric rivers historically produced flooding that reshaped entire landscapes. Multiple tropical system development parallels the seasons that devastated coastal communities. Agricultural devastation approaches the scope of drought disasters that lasted decades. Mining shutdowns echo the industry paralysis during previous extreme weather periods. Tourism destruction could match the economic devastation following historical cyclones. Infrastructure inadequacy becomes apparent, just like during every major Australian disaster. Power grid failures recreate the blackout conditions that defined historical emergency periods. Urban drainage failures repeat the flood patterns that claimed lives during past disasters. Transportation collapse parallels the isolation experienced during historical extreme events. Airport closures echo the connectivity loss during previous weather catastrophes. Economic impact projections approach the billions lost during our worst natural disasters. Insurance industry changes following this event could mirror post-disaster coverage revolutions. Food security threats resemble the agricultural devastation following historical weather events. Scientific vocabulary expands, just like after every unprecedented Australian weather disaster. Meteorological textbooks require revision, similar to updates following historical extreme events. Commuter safety challenges echo the transportation chaos during previous severe weather. School closure decisions parallel the education disruption during historical disasters. The fundamental question from every historical disaster: when does it end? Western Australian heat persistence could exceed the duration of our deadliest heat waves. 7-day extreme heat matches the periods that created legendary survival stories. 50-degree threshold approaches temperatures that made headlines during historical extremes. Emergency response overload recreates the resource shortage during simultaneous historical disasters. Weekend activity cancellations echo the recreation shutdown during previous extreme weather. Beach danger conditions match the surf warnings during historical storm events. Outdoor adventure risks parallel the rescue scenarios during previous weather extremes. Mortality statistics could approach the casualty numbers from our worst weather disasters. Vulnerable population risks match the demographic impacts during historical extreme events. Traffic safety challenges recreate the accident patterns during previous severe weather. Power outage consequences parallel the blackout impacts during historical disasters. Australian resilience will once again prove our national character during crisis. Community spirit historically emerges strongest during our worst natural disasters. Neighbour helping neighbour creates the survival stories that define Australian character. Meteorological limitations become apparent during every unprecedented weather event. Technology reaches its boundaries, just like during every historical extreme weather period. Human experience proves invaluable, similar to local knowledge during past disasters. Queensland flood response requires the rapid decision-making that saved lives historically. Western Australian heat response needs the cooling strategies that prevented historical casualties. Eastern states' storm response demands the shelter protocols that protected families previously. Tropical development threatens to create disasters exceeding our worst historical cyclones. System overload could surpass the emergency management challenges of previous disasters. Australia Day 2025 risks joining the dates that Australians remember for weather tragedy. Decision timing echoes the critical choices that determine survival during historical events. Insurance evolution following this event could mirror the changes after previous disasters. Economic consequences may echo for decades, like the impacts of historical extreme weather. The next 72 hours could join the critical periods that shaped Australian disaster response. Communication strategies must employ the redundancy that saved lives during previous disasters. Supply preparation should follow the lessons learned from communities that survived historical events. Knowledge application from previous disasters separates survival from tragedy. Preparation based on historical experience creates the difference between safety and catastrophe. Subscribe for historical perspective during this potentially legendary weather event. Share your conditions to contribute to the historical record of this extraordinary period. Distribute this information because historical knowledge shared prevents future tragedies. Tomorrow's analysis will examine whether this joins the ranks of legendary Australian disasters. These hours determine if this becomes a historical footnote or a defining national moment. Historical preparation, community strength, and Australian spirit become our primary defences. From the perspective of someone who's tracked every major Australian weather disaster, when history challenges Australian resilience, our national character always emerges victorious. Historical weather analysis concludes: stay prepared, stay strong, stay Australian.